Now showing on BBC Real.
Privuklo odmah našu pažnju su malene kašičice izrađene od kosti, kojih ima kroz čitav neolitski svet na hiljade i hiljade. Zapravo smo pokazali da su tragovi na kašičicama zapravo tragovi mlečnih zuba. Za nas je to bilo izuzetno otkriće, ne samo zbog toga što smo pokazali da je ovaj predmet upotrebljavan u ishrani beba. Neolitske mame po prvi put u evoluciji čovečanstva mogle da imaju više dece nego bilo koja prethodna majka u praistoriji.
Watch more stories like this at bbc.com/real.
4:55 on the morning of February the 24th, I found myself at the heart of war.
President Putin has announced what he calls a special military operation.
From the moment I got off the plane, we were working 12-hour days, and that didn't really stop.
There were the thuds of airstrikes. Police on megaphones were telling people to get to safety.
As journalists, we will never truly understand what it feels like to have your home destroyed.
It's another morning this week where a residential district like this has been struck with the fragments of an intercepted Russian missile.
But the next best thing is for us to find those people and bear witness to what they have gone through.
There are endless moments when this war feels pointless, and this is one of them.
There are so many human tales of survival and recovery.
An undeniable moment in this war. President Zelensky appearing in the heart of Kherson.
The thing about this war which has surprised me the most has been the sheer resilience of people I have come across. Many predicted Russian troops would be wandering Kiev within days.
Ukraine's defense has been both surprising and extraordinary, but it is still the underdog.
Sadly, this war is still happening, and we will continue to tell the story of the conflict in Ukraine.
This is BBC News. I'm Lisa Marie Mishtak. Our top stories. The US, Britain and Australia revealed details of a security pact to counter China's increasing military strength in the Pacific. President Biden says Americans should feel confident in the banking system despite 2 historic bank collapses. More than 100 people have been killed as Storm Freddy returns to Mozambique and Malawi. The US government approves a controversial oil project in Alaska. Activists respond on social media.
Biden just approved the Willow Project with 92% of what ConocoPhillips originally wanted. Millions of young people, millions, asked him not to do this.
And Dick Fosbury, the man who made the high jump with the Fosbury flip-flop, has died at the age of 76. Welcome to our viewers on PBS in America and around the globe. The leaders of the US, Britain and Australia meeting in California have given details of a defence pact that will provide Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. President Biden, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese have met to confirm the AUKUS security agreement. The deal is aimed at countering what the 3 nations see as China's threat in the Indo-Pacific region. Our political editor, Chris Mason, has more from San Diego.
A pact of old democracies coming together to counter a new and growing adversary, China.
Australia and the United Kingdom are 2 of America's most stalwart and capable allies. Our common values, our shared vision for a more peaceful and prosperous future unite us all across the Atlantic and Pacific.
This is about projecting power and resolve, the backdrop and naval base, the images and the words intended to work in unison.
The AUKUS agreement we confirm here in San Diego represents the biggest single investment in Australia's defence capability in all of our history.
Joe, Anthony, we represent three allies who have stood shoulder to shoulder together for more than a century. Three peoples who have shed blood together in defence of our shared values. And three democracies that are coming together again to fulfill that higher purpose of maintaining freedom, peace, and security now and for generations to come.
Compare and contrast what you've just heard and seen with this. China's leader Xi Jinping also promising to modernise its military, to turn it, he said, into a great wall of steel. Prime Minister, is China dangerous?
You know, China is a country with fundamentally different values to ours, and it represents a challenge to the world order. And that's why it's right that we are alert to that and take steps to protect ourselves, protect both our values, stand up for our values and protect our interests.
The main announcement here today was an agreement to build Australia nuclear-powered but not nuclear-armed submarines built in shipyards in the UK and Australia over the next 20 years. It's expected to create thousands of jobs in the UK. Chris Mason, BBC News in San Diego.
Our correspondent Phil Mercer explained how significant this deal is to Australia.
Here in Australia, it's being viewed as monumental, a history-making decision that will make Australia only the 7th country to operate nuclear-powered submarines. The Australian government is also keen to point out to voters in this country that the AUKUS submarine deal could generate up to 20,000 jobs. But all of this comes with an enormous price tag for Australia, estimated that it could reach $244 billion over several decades. But certainly the Australian government believes that the AUKUS Accord will be at the centre of its national security strategy. Australia is very mindful of criticism of the alliance coming out of Beijing. And worth noting too that the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is insisting that on the one hand Australia can have powerful friends and allies with the United States, for example, but also pursue deeper economic and diplomatic relations with China. China is Australia's most important trading partner.
Now, you mentioned China there, but how concerned is Australia about China's growing military in the Indo-Pacific?
That's one reason, or the very big reason, why Australia has signed up to the AUKUS alliance. It was signed in September 2021, so we've had 18 months of pretty secretive negotiations between the three countries to arrive at the fact that in the next decade or so, Australia will take delivery of at least 3 US nuclear-powered submarines. Australia is increasingly wary of China's assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. But once again, Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, says that it's not contradictory to pursue these military alliances with the UK and the United States while also pursuing better relations with China. Mr. Albanese did point out in his speech in San Diego that Australia was also investing heavily in the relationship with China and others in the Indo-Pacific region. But once again, China will be furious at Australia's participation in this. It has accused Beijing, it has accused the US, Australia and the United Kingdom of lapsing back into a Cold War mentality.
Well, let's get some of the day's other news. 2 people have been killed and 9 others injured after they were hit by a truck in Canada. The incident happened in the town of Amqui, north of Quebec City. A 38-year-old man has been taken into custody as police investigate whether the incident was deliberate or not. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has sent his condolences to the people of Amqui. Donald Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, has testified before a grand jury in New York that's investigating a payment to the porn star Stormy Daniels shortly before the 2016 presidential election. His appearance comes as prosecutors consider whether to file criminal charges against the former US president. Police in Wales have recovered the body of a man from the scene of a suspected gas explosion in Swansea. 3 other people were taken to hospital after the blast, which caused a house to collapse. Around 100 people have had to leave their homes. The disgraced paedophile pop star Gary Glitter has been recalled to prison in the UK for breaking the conditions of his release. The 78-year-old was freed last month after serving half of his 16-year sentence for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls. The boss of Silicon Valley Bank has announced that the bank is conducting business as usual within the US and to expect the resumption of cross-border transactions in the coming days. That announcement follows the slump in shares in banks around the world on Monday, despite reassurances from the US government that it would guarantee the customers' deposits of 2 collapsed lenders, Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. It was the biggest such failure for 15 years. Or earlier, I spoke to Mark Douglas, who is the CEO of Mountain, a venture-funded startup in which SVB owns a small percentage. This is what he makes of the crisis.
I think a lot of this crisis, in retrospect, came from a bit of an irrational panic. So SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, is really unlike just about any other bank in the world. So you think of a typical bank, they hold a few $1,000s or pounds in deposits, and then they use that money to make loans to sometimes other businesses, but often for things like mortgages. And those mortgages can be risky over time. Silicon Valley Bank didn't operate like that at all. They didn't have branches. They only worked with venture-funded companies, so VC-backed companies, or the VCs themselves. And then they would hold cash that those companies had just raised and then loan them additional cash for things like receivables, lines of credits to get an office, or things like that, services that a new young company could not typically get, but they could get because they were depositing all that money that was raised in Silicon Valley Bank. So then what's the problem? The money sits there. The startups don't want to risk it. They only want to risk it on themselves. The customers almost all are really essentially the venture capitalists. And what happened is that Silicon Valley Bank needed to raise a little bit more money, and that set off a panic. And the panic became the problem, not the actual financial state of Silicon Valley Bank.
Now, given that the bank is backed by the US government and it's now conducting business as usual, this must be one of the safest banks to bank with in the US right now, right?
Yeah. Actually, I had a call a little bit earlier, and I was talking to a venture cap, pretty prominent venture capitalist, and I was making that point, which they agreed with, which is arguably Silicon Valley Bank is at this moment the safest bank that you can bank with. Now, I don't think that's going to last forever. The U.S. in the United States, deposits are insured for up to $250,000. But for right now, there's essentially, you're banking directly with the U.S. government almost, and there's essentially no safer place to put your money. But over time, that I think SVB will go back to being one of many banks, although they have a very unique business model and ironically a very safe model. You know, one thing that's, I think, really confusing about this crisis is normally when you have a banking crisis, maybe the bank made bad loans or the bank made risky investments, or but none of that happened here. It was to a certain extent an irrational panic that set off a run in the bank, and the panic was the problem.
Mark Douglas, CEO of Mountain, speaking to me a little earlier. Now, a state of emergency has been declared in Malawi after Tropical Storm Freddie struck the country for a second time, killing more than 100 people. Rescue workers describe being completely overwhelmed by the rainfall and mudslides. The cyclone's one of the longest running in history and has caused havoc across parts of southern Africa. The BBC's Shingai Nyoka has more.
After leaving a trail of destruction in Madagascar and Mozambique, Tropical Storm Freddie travelled westwards and is now pummeling southern Malawi, felling trees and power lines. Dozens of people are now confirmed dead and at least 200 are hospitalized. Homes and infrastructure destroyed by the sheer force of the water and mudslides. In a suburb of Blantyre, the second largest city, a desperate search for those trapped beneath the rubble.
So far we have recovered 30 bodies, but we are not yet done. We are still looking for more victims. I'm using this hoe at least to find someone.
Since the storm struck over the weekend, the death toll has risen sharply and is expected to increase further as search efforts expand to other affected districts. Meanwhile, survivors say they witnessed distressing scenes.
It was too bad in the night, but now it is daytime. I can feel the loss. I have never seen something terrible like this. My neighbors' houses are all gone. The family members are gone. They are missing. In some instances, the father is alive, but the wife and the children are gone.
Scientists say climate change is making tropical storms stronger, and as oceans absorb heat from greenhouse gas emissions, that heat is being transferred to the atmosphere.
This is the second time. In 2015, we also experienced some disaster, but this is the worst. As of now, I have seen 12 dead people, and the figures could be rising.
Malawi is currently battling the deadliest cholera outbreak in its history, and UN agencies have warned that the situation could worsen because of Freddy's heavy rains. The storm, which formed over a month ago, is one of the longest-running cyclones in history. It struck Mozambique and Madagascar twice, leaving over 30 people dead. The true extent of the damage is yet to be revealed, and incessant rains are hindering rescue efforts. Tropical storm Freddy is expected to dissipate over the next few days, but it will take longer for these communities to recover. Shingai Nyoka, BBC News.
Stay with us on BBC News. Still to come, Gary Lineker agrees a deal that will see him back on BBC channels after being taken off air over controversial tweet.